So begin to drill, and if you can hear it, if it's a mess, just tell me and I'll
Okay.
move.
No, I don't.
We'll probably have to restart if we do that.
Okay, here we go. No, I think we can go. Welcome back. Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's always an honor to share with you information, news, analysis about what's going on in Mexico, especially this weekend. There's just so much going on. We've been, we've been focused on decisions being made by President Donald Trump and his team and the impact it's having here in Mexico. So we have the visa. You could call it Visa Gate, or you could actually we could also talk about this strategy of identifying criminal organizations as terrorist groups and how that's changed the bilateral relationship. But there is a very important event that is taking place June 5th that we absolutely need to focus on, which is the first time in Mexico's history, and I would say in world history, that all judges, Mexican judges of all levels, including justices of the Supreme Court, will be selected by elections. There's elections on June 1st to select the new upcoming group of people who will be justices for Mexico, Mexican Supreme Court, and from there down, magistrates, local judges. Not all of them are going to be replaced on June 1st, but it's at least half of them. And of course, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of preoccupation what that means, in part because a list of people were published, a list of judges or candidates who want to be judge was published, basically informing or stating that they may either be linked with organized crime, they may have represented organized crime. In some cases, they didn't have the grades to be able to, from law school, to be able to be a candidate. Some of them even have criminal records. And of course, this is creating a lot of anxiety in terms of, well, who are going to be these new judges? That's why really appreciate today's guest, Mary Beth Sheridan. She's joined us before. She's Washington Post bureau chief here in Mexico. Mary Beth, welcome to the show. I know you wrote a story about this concerns in terms of who are these candidates, but you actually focused on a particular candidate. Tell us all about it. Welcome to the show.
Oh, yeah. I decided to focus on one of the candidates, Silvia Delgado, who was one of the attorneys for El Chapo Guzman about 8 years ago when he was in jail in Juarez. His main lawyers and the main judicial proceedings were in Mexico City, but they needed a lawyer to be in Juarez and help him in some of these. He would appear via a video hookup when he was having hearings and so on. So she was his lawyer. And then later, when he went on trial in New York after he was extradited, Silvia Delgado went up and was kind of an advisor to his wife, Emma Coronel, helping her, translating what was going on, kind of explaining the legal process and so on. So she was El Chapo's lawyer, and now she's a candidate to be a criminal court judge at the state level in the state of Chihuahua.
So I'm sure that I mean, there's two sides to this. Of course, the possibility of any former organized crime head or kingpin having their lawyer be now a criminal judge, of course, is very worrisome. But then there's always the argument everybody has a right to for defense, a good defense. So, I mean, just tell us a little bit about her, because I know you went and actually saw how she campaigned. Just tell us what it was like to be around someone who wants to be a future judge campaigning, which in itself is a story, because it's just so strange to think that you have judges actually campaigning in the ways many of them are campaigning, at least through social media. So what does this look like?
Right. So basically, I accompanied her for a day on a Sunday this month. And what she did was she went out with a bunch of flyers to first to a very large flea market in Juarez. Well, she went to sort of two flea markets, one very big, and then she went to kind of more of a craft fair in the afternoon. And essentially, she tried looking kind of like any kind of candidate for public office
Mhm.
would. She gave out these flyers. She tried to engage people in talking about her record. She really focused on the fact that she's been an attorney for a number of years, doing all kinds of different kinds of legal work. So commercial, criminal, all these other things. She was encouraging people to vote. She was saying, if by any chance any of you or your family member wound up, before a judge, I'm going to be impartial and so on. She never mentioned the work for El Chapo. And I should point out, she's not. She did appear, as I mentioned, at the moments when El Chapo was extradited. She gave interviews on TV. She was in New York, like I said, at the trial with his wife, but she's not a person who's famous. So it's not as though the man on the street was recognizing her. And of course, her argument is, as you say, everybody who is accused of a crime has a right to a defense. And she talks about how she provided a technical defense. This doesn't mean she, you know, was working for a cartel or anything like that. And my sense, seeing her, we stopped by her house at one point. It's a nice house, but not huge. In fact, it's pretty small. It's pretty simple. Uh, it doesn't,
She's not
it
living
certainly
the life
doesn't,
of luxury that you
no,
assume
not
that these cartel
exactly.
leaders'
The,
lawyers live.
exactly right. However, I think the other point that is a good one that was raised by people I talked to is this could present a very serious conflict of interest because even though she would not be judging narco trafficking cases, that's a federal crime, she would be a state judge if she wins.
Mhm.
But she could very well have people in front of her who are Sinaloa cartel members. That cartel is very strong in Juarez, who are charged with state level crimes, which could be homicide, could be extortion, carjacking, a whole petty drug sales and so on. So there's both the question of would any of her old contacts in the El Chapo circle try to bring pressure to bear. And there's also a question of the appearance of a conflict of interest, because I think, uh, it wouldn't be surprising if uh, even the judges, let's say somebody from the Juarez cartel, the other big group there, was to be representing a client. And if she ruled against that person, what one person suggested to me, well, that defense attorney then could try and get the whole case thrown out, saying, well, the judge worked for the Sinaloa cartel, so she can't judge my client who is from
Right.
a rival faction. So it does raise a lot of issues, both about potential conflict of interest, appearance of conflict of interest. I also think perhaps also the broader issue for the selection is it raises a lot of questions about what kind of screening happened. Did they
Right.
actually look at her record to see that indeed she perhaps provided a service, a legal service, rather than being one of these lawyers who actually work for the cartel? There are that kind of lawyer too.
That's a really good point that you make is that, not only her case, but many of the cases, many of the candidates are raising the issue. What was the screening all about? How could someone become a candidate if they didn't even fulfill like some of the basic requirements, which had to be, to have certain grades out of law school or a certain number of years worked in the judicial or at least some lawyerly experience. And they were supposed to also screen people based on their reputation, legal reputation or whatever you want. And clearly there is not that. Apparently didn't happen. She was obviously a very lucky woman because all these people who wanted to be candidates had to go through this raffle, literally a raffle, because there was just too many people who wanted to run. So you can only have a certain number of candidates, and she won the raffle basically, and she's now a candidate in the state of Chihuahua. Did she give you any sense whether she receive any support from any of the parties, or she's just basically kind of this lone wolf person who just went and applied and went through the process like everybody else?
She says she's not a party figure, that she's just a person who has a legal background and feels like that should be recognized. I believe she was selected through as you know, the legislature and
Right.
um, the governor's or president's office here in Mexico. Each of them, chose or submitted lists of candidates. I believe she went through it was through the legislature, but
Mhm.
she says she's not a party figure.
Right.
I would say too that when you think about the process of vetting these folks, some of
Right.
these names are emerging because there's a group called Defensores, which is an NGO, which has made a project of asking citizens for suggestions of who they should vet. Uh, who they should look into as potentially problematic candidates. And so the public is sending them all these different names. And the head of that group said to me, I said, well, how did you vet them? How did you find the information? And he said, it was pretty easy. A lot of times we just
Google.
Googled them
Yeah.
and things would come up. So it does go to the point that the vetting that was done on the level of the government seems to have been pretty superficial, where there was not even a Google search.
No, at one point the Senate, excuse me, the lower house, or the president of the lower house, Noroña, had demanded that the National Electoral Institute take these people off the ballots, or at least kind of review their candidacy. And of course, what they said, and I think they were right, is that basically we can't take them off the ballot because that ballots already are being printed, uh, and two, we don't even know if they're going to win. So why go through this process? And I think what's going to happen is once the elections take place and 10 days later after June 1st, because apparently that's how long it's going to take to figure out who won, or who, yeah, basically who won, because there's just so many candidates, and there's so many positions that need to be filled. um, they're going to once again review, or someone's going to take a look at the list of those who won, and I guess I don't know what that means. Are they going to basically strike them out, and they're not going to be able to assume the position even if they won? I just don't know how that's going to work out. Did she give you any sense as to whether she thinks she's going to win?
Um, she pointed out that there's really a lot of candidates, and
Right.
obviously a lot of people just don't have information. So, uh, she's trying to, and also the candidates, they're not as prominent as, typically
Right.
politicians would be in a race for governor or president or whatever it is. So and they're very limited in the amount of money they can spend on their campaign. They're not
Right.
supposed to take donations. They're not supposed to receive government funding. So in her case, she's sending out uh, things on her social media. She's handing out these. She was communicating that she expects to, and it's sort of unknown. I do think, though, in reality, what I was told by other people who are studying this is that there's the expectation that there's going to be very low turnout
Right.
because it's such a massive process, and so few people actually know. They're going to have to choose maybe 100 candidates, right, from these lists, and most people don't have the time to pour through their resumes or figure out who they are. So anyway, with the attendance at the election, the participation expected to be quite low. What some people, academics who've looked into this, tell me is that they think the parties are going to be the ones that turn out their faithful, and the voters will be allowed to take in a piece of paper to the ballot booth, called, well, they nickname it an accordion. And essentially, the
Right.
parties will be giving out lists of here's who we think would be the best candidates. So, from the academics I spoke to in Chihuahua, they said, the people who get elected will very likely be the people that the parties have urged their own faithful to vote for, because those are the people who are going to actually turn out for this extremely complex and confusing election. Uh,
Yeah.
and whether she could benefit from that, I'm not really sure.
Well, confusing. Oh my goodness. I found out I was speaking to one former Federal Electoral Institute commissioner, Benito Nasif, and he was telling me that, it's not that you put an X on the name. It's that you identify the name, and there's a number next to the name, and you're supposed to take the number and put it in some box. on the ballot. So it's even adds another level of confusion because you're not looking at the name. You have to find the name or your candidates and then find their number and then put the number on the ballot. So that, of course, increases that level of confusion. Anything else you'd like to add? Anything else that you found surprising about this as you were writing the story?
Yeah, I think one of the things that was interesting to me being in Juarez was just, it is a city that I always feel like there's a constant sense of energy. It's a city of strivers, of people who want to get ahead.
Right.
And when I talked to Silvia Delgado about how she became a member of El Chapo's legal team, she said she was, doing normal legal work, and she had become a lawyer, by the way, after she'd had several children. She was
Mhm.
working in waste management and became inspired by somebody who worked on environmental issues with her at her company. Anyway, but she really put herself through law school while a single mom, three kids. I mean, it was tough. And so when this offer came from El Chapo, she said, "I saw it as a great opportunity." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, it's prestige. It was recognition of what a good lawyer I am, or they wouldn't have hired me, right?" And I was struck by talking to some of the people in the market after she'd passed through and given out her flyers. I was like, "Did you know that she was the lawyer for El Chapo?"
Right.
And a number of people, it didn't bother them at all. They're like, "Well, a person has to make a living, and those individuals have
A
they're
right to
important
get, yeah.
in Juarez." One guy said to me, "Oh, I worked construction and I worked on a discotheque that belonged to the Lord of the Skies,
Right.
a narco from years
Carrillo
ago who's
Fuentes, yeah.
since
Uh-huh.
Carrillo Fuentes, right?"
Yeah.
And so for some people, when I said to them, "Were you aware?" They were like, "Oh no, that doesn't sound great." But other people were like, "Well, she made a living." And I do think she came across to me as someone who uh, has had to work hard and is, uh,
Right.
saw this, but as I said, as an opportunity. But it's interesting the way that people in Juarez will not necessarily take that as a negative because it's so much a part of their society.
Do you have any sense? I know this is a hard question to answer. Do you have any sense if the U.S. government's paying attention to this? I just keep on wondering what's going to happen when the U.S. government finds out that there's a certain percentage. It may be a small percentage, but there is a percentage of the people who have been elected judges that actually have links to organized crime in a way that is unacceptable to the U.S. This particular administration. Do you have any sense if they're following this issue? I mean, are these people running the
Yeah.
risk of their visas getting yanked?
Well, I think that's a really open question. And I think that, I mean, I imagine because there's so much focus of the US government right now on Mexico and drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl, I'm sure it's not escaping their notice. But I would say, I think that the greater threat, there's an argument made by the president, Scheinbaum, that these candidates who have been tagged as having worked with narco traffickers as their lawyers, uh, that they're a tiny percentage, and that is true. But the thing that we don't know is that there's parts of the country where, crime groups essentially control the society. They
Correct.
impose mayors. We have seen that in election after election,
Right.
where the opposing candidate is killed and so on. So I think the even greater threat might be places where there is a, drug trafficking group or criminal group that's rounding up the votes, and they're basically saying to either voters, or they're making it clear within the party that maybe sort of choosing some of these candidates. We want this one to win, right? So it's not going to be somebody necessarily with a high profile who appeared at the El Chapo case. It's somebody who you've never heard of, but in fact, quietly they are agreeing or
Right.
understanding that the deal is that they're going to rule in favor of these narcos. I think that could be actually the greater problem.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. Well, we are waiting to see what's going to happen June 1st. Mary Beth Sheridan, she's bureau chief for the Washington Post here in Mexico. I really appreciate you joining us here on Living in Mexico. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to a commercial break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar, and you're listening and watching Living in Mexico.